Okay. This one isn't a video essay as such. It's not got like a take. I guess there's some analysis, but this video is about getting organised. I'm frustrated because I really don't want people to see my work as primarily about being trans, like about transness, and I think it's clear I have other stuff to say, but like... cis people keep on doing shit that we need to do something about. On April 16th, 2025, the UK Supreme Court made a ruling that distinguished between biological sex and socially constructed gender, deciding that in the Equalities Act, terms like woman only refer to so-called biological women. What they mean by this is cis women, as biological woman is a nonsense term that sounds common sense to people who don't want to think about trans people, and exists to avoid using terms like cis that would validate trans people's experiences. This ruling stated it should not be taken as an anti-trans victory and was trying to clarify a legal matter. I don't care for equivocation on this, although what came next was worse. The Supreme Court ruling was wrong, willfully uninformed, and irresponsibly negligent of public duty. On the 25th of the same month, the EHRC, Equalities and Human Rights Commission, published an interim guidance that was not binding, but told institutions and businesses that they had a responsibility to exclude trans people from single-sex spaces corresponding to their gender. This would make life functionally impossible for trans people, and yes, that's the point.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't know if anyone else in the House has butch lesbian friends and have been with them when they've been told to get out of women's toilets, but I have. And it is not pleasant and it's not nice. So those people that are using this as a political football, again, should be ashamed of themselves.
And I need to share with you my constituents, one who told me, it seems I am going to be ghettoised into trans spaces, and another who said this ruling sends a message that we do not belong, however much we contribute.
How would trans people's exclusion from toilets they have long used be a proportionate means of achieving a legitimate aim, as the Supreme Court judges and Equality Act dictates? And would the Minister like to clarify that there is nothing in law, in fact, which requires trans women to use men's toilets, or trans men to use women's toilets, or non-binary people to use one corresponding with the sex they were assigned at birth?
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Supreme Court's judgment was clear on biological sex, but I do understand and recognise the need to ensure that there is provision, including toilet facilities and other provision in place for everyone within our society. That's why many businesses, many service providers also provide unisex provision, why many service providers will also put in place enclosed bathrooms that do not require people to make that decision, to ensure that their dignity and privacy is respected.
In October, several international human rights bodies criticised the EHRC and warned that the UK government was fast approaching a complete breakdown on human rights, while the EHRC urged the government to hurry up in producing new legally binding guidance so that trans people can be banned from public life under threat of arrest and then imprisonment for peeing. Just to put a fine point on this, it is not actually illegal for a cis man in the UK to use the women's bathroom. Like, if he went in there by mistake or because the men's bathroom was full and he was absolutely bursting, he wouldn't be committing a crime. If he was asked to leave and refused or became hostile or something, yeah, he could be trespassing. There could be a crime. But if a trans woman is using the women's bathroom in the UK and a transphobe is there, this bigot could harass her, verbally abuse her, or physically assault her, take pictures of her, and even call the police. And if the police are also transphobes, which is likely, they're police, then she could end up arrested and possibly sent to a men's prison. This move obviously empowers bigots and exists to empower more bigotry, and I think that's clear to anyone who's thought about it for about 10 seconds. Meow 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 meow. Been playing with the Katamari Damacy recently. It's stuck in my head. Anyway, with the EHRC under fire from the international community, Labour hysterically unpopular after chasing the far right since Starmer came to power and then supporting the genocide in Gaza, and Reform surging in the polls, the interim guidance was taken down. Then, in November, Bridget Phillipson told the EHRC to stop trying to provoke public debate over the issue and let MPs write their Nuremberg laws in peace. Are these recent developments a backlash that mean trans people can relax? No, of course not. It's gonna keep getting worse. Yay! Social shame is used as a tool by people to try to reduce behaviour they see as negative in others, or remove those others from their social environment for that behaviour. But when that behaviour is just being a kind of person, instead social shame is used to police society and determine who does and who does not have legitimate personhood. If you are being shamed and you argue against the shame, this will get you more shaming. If you see someone being shamed and try to help them to not be shamed, or in some cases just treat them like a human being, you too will be shamed. We, as trans people, are being shamed. Okay, wait, don't leave yet. I know I'm a posh-sounding English tranny, but I'm not about to say some shit like, the cure to shame is pride! The cure is organising. It's always organising. There is an ongoing project by politicians in the US and UK to eradicate trans people from public life. Week after week you hear about new legislation, often in other places, but sometimes where you are, casually and callously announcing a change to public policy that, if enforced, would make life completely unlivable for every trans person. They said on TV that you aren't a person anymore. For a lot of people, the relative acceptance of trans people in liberal progressive society in the last few years has been a safe enough environment to come out and start living their best lives, and legislative changes that move in the opposite direction obviously seem existentially threatening. That makes sense. The problem with this kind of existential panic, however, is that it flattens everything and makes many people freeze, or if they can, flee. I do get it. When the UK Supreme Court made its ruling and then the EHRC brought out its guidance, I spent a while, with my partner, who's also a trans woman, moving through the world in a numb horror. What are you supposed to feel when some of the biggest newspapers in the country run the headline, "Trans women are not women," on the front page? We talked to the owner of a local cafe that day, someone I've known for years and years, and she was speechless at the news. Eventually she told us, it will change back. Maybe in time it will. But in the meantime, I know that some trans women are going to be attacked for using women's bathrooms and toilets, perhaps even arrested and sent to men's prisons. These policy changes are going to get people killed, and specifically killed in some of the most impossibly cruel ways. But the reality is, I am not one of the people most likely to be affected. I am, despite these changes, in a relatively safe position, less safe than I was, but categorically not in as much danger as some trans people. Realistically, if I spend my time panicking, I am using time and energy that I could be spending making those people safer, doing effectively nothing. I understand the panic, but it isn't serving us. It isn't serving, Diva, let it go! Let's discuss some analysis so we have a better understanding of the situation, and then talk about what we have to do. What states need, even before land, is people. Patriarchal states organise people and the production of new people into family units led by men, who effectively own the women and children of the family and whose name is passed on, through them creating a system that all men are invested in because they think that their names may one day carry a special weight. It's a pyramid scheme of heredity. The patriarchal state must maintain a tight control on reproductive choices in order to enforce its regime that says biology is destiny and men are men and women are property. Of course, if it's possible for someone to change sex, all of this falls apart because women must be people. Yes, our enemy is patriarchy, plain and simple. The founding lie of patriarchy is that men inherently want to do violence to women. This idea, taught to boys, is what Bell Hooks calls the psychic self-mutilation of men under patriarchy, and while it doesn't compare ultimately to the violence done to women, it is the first violence in creating a world that treats women as property. A number of women have fallen into a pseudo-feminism that takes this patriarchal lie for granted, that there is an essential character possessed by everyone born with a penis that makes them want to harm women. In the last decade, the most prominent form of this patriarchal pseudo-feminism, the HR department to feminism's trade union, has been trans-exclusionary radical feminism. TERF ideology is so compatible with the state and with patriarchy because it agrees with it on its most fundamental ideas, and the labour of TERFs is always toward destroying trans people, never toward stopping the violence of cis men. So, here in Britain, TERFs are enacting a secular version of the extermination campaign evangelicals are pushing in the US. But whether they're gripping Bibles and wearing baseball caps, or writing a strongly worded letter to the Hampstead Heath Ladies' Pond from a Gale's bakery in Islington, it is patriarchal fascism as a force that is trying to wipe out trans people. When people say J.K. Rowling is Andrew Tate for middle-class white women, they're simply exactly on the money. La 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 la. I've honestly just been getting like little work things done and house move things done, and then I've been just playing Katamari Damacy. That's like meow meow meow. Come to volley, do your best. But listen, they tried to erase us from history before, and they failed. The Nazis burned all research and records from Magnus Hirschfeld's Institut für Sexualwissenschaft as an accompanying act of epistemic eradication alongside their murders of queer people. As Sophie points out in their excellent book, A Nazi Word for a Nazi Thing, the reporting at the time that refused to acknowledge what was being burned, what information was being destroyed, is a secondary act of erasure and eradication. But this one has been less successful. We know what the Nazis were trying to destroy, just as we know from documents hundreds of years old, there were people living transgendered lives in medieval England and Europe, even though the histories try to obfuscate them as unmentionable. We also know indigenous cultures all around the world had an enormous variety of gender expressions and experiences before Christian heterosexual patriarchal ideas of what men and women had to be were violently imposed on them. Even if they could get rid of every single trans person alive right now, the fascists have spent the best part of a decade screaming from the tops of their lungs about us. The cat's out of the bag. They will not be able to erase the memory of trans people from human history. They've failed already at keeping us out of the story of humanity. The task now is making sure as many of us survive what they are doing as possible. As Sarah Harpy puts it in her barn burner polemic on the dolls, we don't need Instagram videos, we don't need t-shirts, we need patriarchal civilization to be weakened by a war on many fronts. I've linked Harpy's article below as well as my Substack piece expanding on the idea, and reworked parts of it into this video, but the most important idea here is this. Trans people need to organise ourselves, most especially trans women, and our allies need to act to help us materially to enact our plans toward liberation. A lot of Sarah Harpy's writing focuses on separatism, what Margaret Killjoy recently called the demi-ground, what I would call the disappearing act, a revolutionary necessity. This concerns the capacity that revolutionary movements have to be invisible to the state and broader society generally. As dual power is built, the idea is that discursive spaces and communities of the revolution supersede the mainstream and absorb its useful parts. Spaces into which trans women, especially trans women of colour, right now can disappear, are becoming more vital as the patriarchy makes it more clear and more public its wish to completely exterminate us. But they are only one part of the struggle. I'm making this video in the specific context that my country is in the process of bringing in laws that will make it incredibly difficult to exist in public as a trans person, while emboldening bigots in a way that will almost certainly lead to more direct violence. The laws they are bringing in may lead to trans women I know being arrested, and if they are, may lead to them being sent to a men's prison. I'm also making this in the context of the ruling classes of countries across the imperial core becoming nakedly fascist, with trans people being one of the primary targets of that fascism. The second Trump administration has been nightmarish for trans people. Just the other day, his attorney general said she wants the FBI to start putting cash bounties on trans activists. Since this video is primarily aimed at UK trans people, it's worth saying this. If Reform does win the next UK election, there is every reason to believe that they will treat us the same way that the Trump administration is treating our siblings over in the States. I've done the classic Sophie from Mars video thing that I end up doing every time recently, where I got all my filming done and I was feeling really proud of myself, and then realised there was like a bunch more other stuff I wanted to say on camera. So you're getting me again in grub editing mode. Hi! If politicians were to suddenly have like an unexpected attack of moral fibre and they signed in a bill that totally somehow liberated trans people tomorrow, we can see very clearly that they could just sign our freedom away again the next day. We will be free when and only when we are organised. A recent triumph of this idea has been the trans liberation group in the new UK Socialist Party, Your Party. Hang on, I know, Your Party has been a real shit show so far, I'm not trying to sing their praises, but specifically I want to highlight the success of trans people organising in a democratic structure to combat transphobia. This lot caught a lot of flack from other trans people for trying to organise in a party it seems we had already given up on based on the bigotry of specific MPs, but these organisers' efforts led to a commitment to trans liberation in the Your Party constitution.
Personally, I'd like to see a lot more specifics from your party and solutions to the other bigger problems before backing them, but this should be recognised as a success of trans organising. When our lives are left in the hands of cis people, we can see how easily they throw us away.
Returning to Sarah Harpy's call for action, arming the dolls is a semi-metaphor, right? Arming means giving somebody agency. It's about allowing us to fight for our freedom, which is a thing that we currently don't really have the ability to do. Whether someone uses the agency that you give them to defend, attack, disappear completely, run away, like, it's not up to the person helping someone be able to do what they want to say what it's for. So arming the dolls has to mean something more pragmatic than protect the dolls, which, as well as being vague, is kind of disempowering. It's good that this call is specifically about our agency and about us liberating ourselves, recognizing that we must take action as much as we need for people to support us in taking action.
To start with this, we have to understand not only what threats there are, but who is under threat in order to protect them. The biggest immediate threats of physical danger to trans women are from bigoted violence and arrest. The relationship between these can be seen well in the cases of trans women of colour CeCe McDonald and Jaya Cruz, who both defended themselves from bigoted street attacks and wound up in men's prisons as a result of defending themselves from people who explicitly said they were going to kill them. Bigoted violence can be broken down further into the kind of street attacks that Cruz and McDonald were defending themselves against, and into cases of domestic violence and violence against sex workers by people who view them as a type of person it is acceptable to abuse. This means we should view trans women of colour, trans women who are financially dependent on their partners, and survival sex workers as the most at-risk members of our community, and not just protecting but also enabling them to protect themselves includes preventing them from being imprisoned. Prison is grim for everyone by design. For the credibility of punishment as justice to be viable in society, prisons must be places that people suffer by definition. However, for there to be a political movement that fights for our liberation, in a context where prison for a trans woman means a cage where she is abandoned to be raped to death, we need to make de-arrest training a fundamental in queer spaces. We also need to engage in intensive prison support for any trans woman who is incarcerated. Here, if protecting the dolls means keeping trans women off the front lines of direct action to prevent arrest, arming the dolls means, in the worst case, helping every trans woman survive incarceration, and in the best case, never letting the cops take a single doll. In my Substack piece, which I've drawn a bit from here, Arm the Dolls, but what does it all mean? I talk from the perspective of community measures to grant trans women the maximum political agency in the face of attacks that are trying not only to drive us out of public life, but to remove any options for political protest we have too. I've linked it in the description, but I'd like to focus on two specific organising strategies today I firstly think are more fundamental, and secondly, in concert will facilitate the disappearing act for those in our community who need it. The first is harm reduction organising, and the second is assemblies. Harm reduction, as a philosophy, aims to shift resources, financial, physical, and informational, into the hands of people most vulnerable to structural violence. Eager students in the class will have already put together that communism would be the ultimate form of harm reduction, and while it's worth understanding that this can be seen as a socialist organising approach, harm reduction organising seeks to put what capital would deem surplus populations at the centre of the movement, in a way similar to the approach theorised in the book Health Communism. In practice, harm reduction organising usually focuses on drug users, especially homeless drug users, but has begun to expand to address the needs of sex workers, people with precarious immigration statuses, the mad and the mentally ill, and queer and trans people in recent years. A programme aimed at this that I have experience with is the Harm Reduction Hub, organised as part of the London Harm Reduction Collective. This space offers safer sex resources, drug testing strips, a needle supply programme, and more. But for most hub users, the most important thing it offers is non-judgmental space to have a hot drink and talk. Harm reduction organising recognises the inevitability of risk and harm, that people will engage in activities like taking drugs that carry some risk, and that we can neither rely on teaching abstinence nor on pretending the risks are not real. But to reduce harm the best we can, offering education and resources to anyone who wants them is the best approach. I'd love to see more harm reduction hubs set up, frankly as many as possible, because I think they do vital work to keep the most precarious people in our society safe. But we're talking about trans people right now, specifically. If we want to focus on saving trans lives, making parallel structures is the bulk of the work to be done right now. We've been systemically shut out of any democratic recourse against the attacks on our lives. We have to focus on building. I think that as a very first step, more harm reduction organising in trans spaces would make an enormous difference. Some of this overlaps with broader harm reduction organising. Many trans women do sex work, so harm reduction for sex workers benefits us necessarily. Trans community spaces are often party scenes, so drug testing and education, like everybody else, benefits trans people. Trans people need safer sex resources and sex and kink education to reduce harms in kink and sex. Trans people are disproportionately living in poverty or even homeless. Trans people frequently experience madness and mental illness, especially with the government rolling out new policies against us every single week. Some of this work is specific to us, working to make spaces explicitly declare that they are safe to trans people and unsafe to bigots, working to educate ourselves in community how we internalize and perpetuate transphobia and transmisogyny, harm reduction work around DIY HRT. All of these are jumping off points. There's a lot of work to be done in figuring out and implementing the specifics, but the through line here is that respectability politics is not going to save lives. We need to be honest with ourselves about what risks we face and who is at most risk, and organise our efforts proportionally. There's a serious danger of us seeing ourselves only through the most white, most educated, most comfortable, and most privileged representations of transness that are upheld as public figures, and hiding the sex work, the drugs, the mental illness all down in the dark so cis people don't see, while these same things expose the most vulnerable of us to the most harm. Which I think brings us nicely on to my second organising approach, assemblies. For those who are not aware, assemblies are a type of facilitated, structured conversation where a group engages with what its needs and problems are and how to meet and solve them.
There is some good organising being done at the moment by trans activists, but though well-intentioned, this organising is decided upon by the same people. Anyone who's in organising knows the tendency for there to be the same faces popping up doing a lot of different things, and it's often bogged down by a lack of capacity. If there was a regular space for democratic discussion for trans people, the decision-making process could be taken out of the hands of the activist class. People at an assembly will raise their issues in ways that would be invisible to those of us who learned their radicalism from reading books or watching video essays. And the capacity would be baked in. The people who are there to discuss their issues can contribute to solve their issues. The following is my suggestion for a trans assembly model that could work at a local, perhaps regional, and ideally national level. They say the way to get the right answer on the internet is sometimes to loudly and confidently declare the wrong answer. So to that end, here's my suggestion, and please rip it to shreds. Change absolutely everything you like, as long as you make the meetings happen. Here it is.
Meet regularly, I'd say every 2 weeks, with a venue open for a couple of hours before the start of the assembly for a volunteer group to cook food for everyone. With the venue open, people can come in and socialise, get ready for the meeting, help with the food if they want, use the space for anything else. Perhaps they have legal or medical admin they've been putting off. Then, when the assembly begins, start with a rundown of the agenda by the facilitators. The agenda should have been available to everyone before the meeting, and the facilitators should have volunteered at the end of the last assembly. After this, do floor speeches. Allocate a number of slots for fixed-length speeches for any attendees to give their perspectives on whatever they'd like. If they want to use this time to talk about community mess, that's just fine. If they want to use their time to talk about the assembly itself, great. If they want to just let their feelings out, that is vital. If they want to promote their surgery fundraiser, literally, why not? After this, move into the agenda items. Either discuss by taking hands in the room, or, for some more involved discussions, break out into smaller groups and have a chosen representative from each group feed the answers back to the facilitators. When you have issues and goals identified, create working groups to achieve goals. You want to plan a phone blockade of the office of a transphobic politician, so you create a working group to make those plans while taking hands in the room for potential participants. You want to start a regular letter writing program to trans prisoners, so you create a working group who will find a venue and regular time to convene and write together. You want to make a community HRT production process, start a working group with volunteers to make it based on the estimated size of the need for supply, discuss in the assembly what people's concerns are and how best to satisfy them. You have a lot of trans people with precarious housing, so start a housing working group who are working closely with renters unions while putting together queer house shares who need a flatmate and trans people about to be evicted.
To be clear, all of these working group examples are based on things I've personally seen being organised already. But through an assembly, they could be plugged into each other and share each other and the community's resources better, right? Also, a lot of these community organisations tend to lack a sense of organising toward something, or you could call it a revolutionary, liberatory framework to what they're doing. I think with an assembly tying things together, people could have both the immediate help they need and the bigger political project.
Consider also having a fund for working groups that anyone can donate into. There are a lot of tech trainees and cis allies with comfortable salaries who would love to contribute money rather than time. After the main discussion, consider having something like a member solidarity section, like renters' union branches often do, where people with specific issues bring them to the group and the room can split into volunteer bunches to help those people. After this, do your AOBs, that's any other business, get people to volunteer for next time to facilitate, take hands, keep minutes, and so on. And make sure everyone knows who to speak to concerning the operations of each working group. The point here, and this one's important to me because I've seen this work really well in very successful organizations that run like Assemblies for a period of years and years, and fail really badly in organizations that disappear in the first 6 months. This idea of taking volunteers from the assembly to run the next assembly is about the organizers of the initial assembly, the original team of people organizing it, to be able to step back and become completely non-essential. You don't want a community structure to rely on one person or a few people always being there and always working on it, because that's an enormous vulnerability to something that it should be really essential. This local assembly could have representatives feed back to a city or regional assembly, ideally changing the representatives each time. This is something I've seen people call using spokes. Ideally, the regional or city assembly should still be open to everyone to at least spectate, if not participate. The same on a level above to a national assembly. A regional assembly can make bigger projects like housing or put more funds towards HRT production that enables higher level safety and sterilization that many small groups wouldn't be able to afford for their startup costs. It could also coordinate large marches or actions very effectively. A national assembly could mobilize enormous mass demonstrations, deliver political demands to the government, or work in concert with trade unions to make sure that trans issues are taken seriously by organized labor. If we could pull this off, create these assemblies, and form this democratic structure, we could turn trans people from a political football into a real political bloc. The organized structure that makes the assemblies happen can be very small and isn't the same as the assembly itself, which I feel is important to understand. It isn't even the same as the facilitators, except maybe in the first meeting of each assembly. People aren't joining an org by coming to an assembly necessarily. The volunteer facilitators come from the community by design. This is similar to how some orgs will have paid staff organizers who aren't the same as their chair, treasurer, secretary, comms officer, and so on. The people who get together to organize the assembly are in an obvious position where they could hold quite enormous power over the community. So getting the assembly out of their hands and into the hands of the community ASAP is an important part of this. It's also worth saying that no trans person should be excluded from these. Community conflicts aren't part of the job of the assembly to resolve, and the situation here is too critical to be locking people out of the room. Ours is a community with a lot of beefs in it, and that should not get in the way of fighting for our liberation. For these reasons, I suggest that people getting together to organise an assembly make constitutional and protocol documents right away to figure out how they can get from organising the logistics of the first assembly to stepping back and letting it carry itself on its own momentum.
Panicking will not save us. Organising will. They say the job of leaders is to create more leaders. And I think in this situation where the crisis feels so overwhelming that it's hard to even tell clearly where to begin organising, giving people a practical experience in organising by letting them participate in a democratic structure is one of the most empowering things we could do to start to solve our problems. It's vitally important, perhaps the most important question of political organising in the next 50 years, how we organise in communities where everyone is struggling and everyone is suffering.
One of the important first answers for us to look at is to escape the trauma response mindset that gives us all a sense of foreshortened future and learn to breathe, think more slowly, and make structures built to help our communities far into the future. You aren't building a lifeboat to make it through a storm here. You're building a sustainable life on your island. Knowing survivors will wash up on your shores daily, and when they do, your island will get that little bit bigger and that little bit more beautiful. Before I wrap this up, I want to talk about what a world without patriarchy might look like for a bit. I've talked about how these fascists are bound to lose, I've talked about the organising I think we need to do, but I think it keeps our heads pointed in the right direction to always be looking towards something utopian. In the last few years, the Cuban government voted through a new family code, the most progressive in the world, in fact. It defines marriage simply as a consensual union between two people and says that it is one way of organising a family. Though the code also leaves space for extended families and non-traditional family structures, which people in their lives know are their family, but in no other country in the world can have legal recognition for it. This new family code was brought in part because of the efforts of Mariela Castro, Fidel Castro's granddaughter, who spent years listening to and working with queer and trans people, specifically leading to enormous reforms to queer rights and trans healthcare provision. If the patriarchal grip of states on our reproductive choices and bodily autonomy is dissolved, every person born into society can have the same basic opportunities that only white, cis, rich men have right now. Gender abolition became one of the most misunderstood and ultimately discarded terms from 2010's gender discourse. Oh, a trans woman? How can you be abolishing gender if you're so invested in being a woman and feminine and girly? You know, misogyny. Like all abolition, gender abolition does not mean to simply throw away and replace with nothing. It means to build something that can replace the existing structure in a way that will eliminate what fucking sucks total shit about it. You're a prison abolitionist, huh? Do you want to just let all the prisoners go tomorrow? No, I wish we could do that, but there's a bunch of organising to do first. We want to create a world where gender carries with it no power, no threat, and in doing so is able to have not just greater variety and depth, but more meaning to people too. If people aren't just performing the gender they were assigned at birth, the gender that signifies to people what kind of person or non-person they are in a hierarchy, we can interact with one another in a truer way that many people have sadly never gotten to know. It feels like, with the monumental repression of the left and the imperial core of the last 40 years especially, our utopias have gotten less clear in the mind of most people. The subject has been well trodden in classics like capitalist realism. Sadly, what I feel like we've seen in places like the US and UK, where the left is a complete mess, is that the world the left is trying to create, the political changes they are pushing for, are more easily seen by many in a reflection of the world the fascists are pushing towards, which they're articulating pretty clearly. A world where trans liberation has succeeded is a gender abolitionist world, is a world where gender does not define your safety, comfort, social mobility, agency, or freedom, and with any voices that would really fight for our liberation shut out of public discourse, it feels easier sometimes to see this just as the opposite of what the fascists are saying. I think people have spent way too long trying to point out the silliness or irrationality or inconsistency of fascist rhetoric when we should all have been acting and organising and building this whole time instead. It doesn't matter that the things that transphobes say are self-contradictory or sometimes just flatly silly, because they're not actually claims about truth. They are rules that they are trying to build their fashy patriarchal world from. They're not so much saying they think that as much as they're saying they want it to be that. Biology is destiny, that assigned sex at birth dictates an enormous amount about everyone's lives. That's why the big movers behind the TERF movement have shifted focus onto abortion, because it's the next step for them in building a hyper-patriarchal society. What I'm trying to highlight in this conclusion is obviously that material action is vitally important. It's the only thing that actually makes any difference. But at the same time, we mustn't let them flatten our imaginations. We have to remember the world we are fighting for, because letting it go extinct in our minds would be the ultimate defeat and domination by these people who want us to not even be able to imagine a world where gender doesn't dictate your whole fucking life. We want to bring an end to patriarchal society because we are some of its natural enemies, and we refuse to be just eternally downtrodden and abused by it anymore. For this reason, we are going to organise, and for this reason, we are going to make the world we want to live in. I have ended some videos before telling people that they need to say to themselves, I believe that we will win. I think this is important, but today I'd like to leave you all with the immortal words of Assata Shakur, who unfortunately died last year. It is our duty to fight for our freedom, and it is our duty to win. We must love each other and support each other. We have nothing to lose but our chains.